I want to thank you all for coming, and before we get started with tonight's amazing panel, I want to make sure I mention all the different organizations that came together to make sure that this was possible. So tonight's event is a project of the NYU chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, but it wouldn't be possible without the support and the contributions of the Arab American Association of New York, of Black Lives Matter New York City, of the Black Allied Law Students Association at NYU, the NYU Institute of African American Affairs, the NYU Law Students for Justice in Palestine, the New York City chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, the NYU South Asian Law Students Association, the NYU Law Students for Economic Justice, the NYU Coalition on Law and Representation, and the NYU Women of Color Collective. The event is also being transcribed by NYU Law and Social Change, and proceeds from the sales for anything you buy from Common Notions Publishing, which is here today, will go towards covering the cost for this event. Tonight's panel is a special one, but I want to clarify kind of from the beginning what tonight's panel is not. So this is not going to be kind of a personal history of Kathleen Cleaver, and hopefully it's not going to be a 3-hour lecture on the Black Panther Party. Instead, tonight's panel will be a dialogue between two active community organizers here in New York, namely Key Williams of Black Lives Matter New York City and Aber Kawas of the Arab American Association, as they discuss the legacy of the Black Panther Party with one of its revolutionaries, namely Kathleen Cleaver. We'll discuss the evolution of organizing grassroots mass resistance and what lessons can be drawn from the experience of the Panthers and in our own organizing efforts as students and as community members. In short, unlike most of the lectures in this building, today's panel is supposed to be productive. As many of you know, before becoming a professor of law at Emory University, Professor Cleaver was the communications secretary of the Black Panther Party. The Panthers formed in 1966, meaning that last year was their 50th anniversary. One aspect of the party's worldview at that time that made it particularly unique was its transcendence of the limits of political liberalism, opting for a worldview that connected black resistance to white supremacy to the struggle of national liberation movements throughout the world and to other anti-systemic struggles that sought the radical reorganization of our society into one that is just. The Panthers vocally eschewed the politics of compromise, complicity, and corruption that had become commonplace in some parts of the black rights movement at the time. And a party with a growing mass base, the Panthers were primary targets for political repression under the FBI's COINTELPRO program. So as most of you probably know, the media depictions of the party have ranged from mocking to outright hostile, depicting the party as everything from a group of, misguided teens, which is erroneous because the Panthers were adults, but also to describing it as like a reverse Ku Klux Klan and things like that. And today we're seeing similar attempts to delegitimize pretty much any resistance that goes beyond the limits of pink hats and Democrats. And from the attempts to use patriotism and American nationalism to undermine and water down resistance to Islamophobia, to the sudden surge in fair-weather allies to marginalize people, there is an aggressive attempt to limit not only our words but our organizing, whether it be demanding an end to racist policing here or the international struggle for an end to imperialism and for the liberation of all colonized peoples, including the struggle for the liberation of Palestine. And as those of you who've paid attention to nuance already know, there's an aggressive struggle to whitewash American imperialism, a struggle that appears to be taking place wholly along lines of class and race. So I hope that tonight's event won't just be another event. I hope that tonight's event will be productive, and I hope that it'll be useful to those of you who are here to plan the next wave of the people's resistance as we push beyond the failed and ineffectual models that have thus far delivered us to the age of Donald Trump. And it is with that in mind that I want you to join me in welcoming Aber Kawas, Key Williams, and Kathleen Cleaver.
I'm Key Williams. I'm a community organizer with Black Lives Matter New York City chapter. I've been with the chapter since the ride down to Ferguson, and my folks have returned back, and we decided from there that it couldn't stop in Ferguson, that we had to keep going and creating something, and then grew the global network of what is now Black Lives Matter, the global network. We're part of a larger group of movement spaces, considered the Movement for Black Lives, which includes other organizations that do similar racial justice, gender justice work as we do, such as Dream Defenders, BYP 100. All those organizations fall under Movement for Black Lives. And I'm really grateful to be here tonight, and I'm thankful for everybody that came out to support.
My name is Aber Kawas. Right now I serve as the lead organizer at the Arab American Association. We're a small nonprofit in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn that does services and advocacy for the Arab American community. A little bit about myself is that I've been somebody who's been involved in especially anti-Islamophobia movements since I was about 16 years old. A lot of work around Muslim prisoners that I was part of when I was a college student. A lot of work to do intersections between Islamophobia and immigration, etc. And I've worked at CARE New York. I've worked at the Urban Justice Center. So a lot of nonprofits in the city that are working on policing, etc. And so a lot of the work that I do is I do focus on the Arab community, but I try to expand the work that we're doing and make the conversation bigger. Put in stuff about Palestine liberation, anti-war, etc., race, class analyses into the work that we're doing, especially as Islamophobia work these days is very much like in a trajectory where we're just trying to prove that we're good Muslims, let us stay. And we're trying to complicate that. So that's a little bit about myself.
Well, I don't know why this picture's up here. It just got stuck. But believe it or not, that was a campaign poster. I ran for office in California on the Peace and Freedom Party ticket. So did Bobby Seale, so did Huey Newton, and so did Eldridge Cleaver. Eldridge Cleaver was their candidate for president. Bobby Seale was the state senate. I was running for a state assembly. And I had a slogan, I think it was the ballot of the bullet, which was from Malcolm X, I think. And that's in front of my house in San Francisco. So it's a shotgun, it's legal. There's a little wrinkle here. I was married to an ex-convict named Eldridge Cleaver. Ex-convicts are not allowed to have weapons. We were both members of the Black Panther Party, which was a legally armed organization. So we wanted really to test this. Like, I have a shotgun in my house because I'm entitled to, and this is my campaign poster. So but also right around that time, Eldridge Cleaver was in the process of leaving the country. So, but they never stopped it. So it was provocative? No, testing. We were testing the political waters. That was a long time ago. I think that was in 1969. So the son I was pregnant with in 1970, born in 69, born in Algiers, is now in his late 40s, and my daughter's she's 46, he's 47, and I have lots of grandchildren. So times have changed somewhat. My times have changed. You guys are experiencing, the young ones are experiencing without the benefit of all the drama connected with the Vietnam War, which excited and dramatized issues and divided the country so intensely. This is the same era of the Black Panther Party. That kind of uprising against the Vietnam War, the Black Panther Party. There was uprisings in Europe and Germany, and there was fighting in Japan, and it seemed like there was a revolutionary impetus all over the world. Eldridge left the Bay Area. Instead of surrendering to prison, he went to Montreal and took a boat to Havana and arrived on Christmas Day, 1968. And I thought I would join him. Just so happened I never got to Havana. I did get to Algiers, and I got there with a message, wait, Eldridge is going to join you. We didn't get a lot. We didn't have CDs. We didn't have internet. We couldn't communicate that easily. I got this in a verbal message from a man stopping me on the streets in Paris. Wait, I have a message for you from Algiers. My name is Lee Lockwood. And I said, well, I've heard of him, but I don't know. I mean, you just have to take it on trust. And so I ended up in Algiers, and we stayed there 4 years. We started something called the International Section of the Black Panther Party, and we had a lot of fugitives come and join us, and some of them were so excited to come join us, they hijacked airplanes to join us. The Algerian government did not approve of hijacking, and so the first one came, a brother from Vietnam wearing his uniform and his white girlfriend from Coos Bay, Oregon, and a suitcase that he said was a bomb. They said, don't bother, the FB type, this is no dumb nigger, So they said, whatever he tells, do it, and he ended up in Algeria. We didn't know them, they didn't know us. 2 months later, another airplane is hijacked from a Delta airline from Miami, and they had 5 people, 2 children, and they brought a ransom of quite a large amount of money. At that point, the Algerians, the government decided we had to go. They didn't tell us that, but we knew it, and they put us under arrest, disarmed us, and shut down our celebration of the African American National Day. and so eventually we have to leave. But during that era, international support and international collaboration, particularly with people who were from Palestine who had no state, and they could identify with African Americans and we could identify with them because we had no state. You know, we were both people who wanted to transform the world and transform our position in it, but we didn't really have any government say-so or the kind of apparatus, let's say liberation movements in Africa. They could fight in South Africa or West Africa, whoever, take over and become the government. That wasn't going to happen in our case. I'm very pleased to be here, to be in New York, this moment of, I don't want to say moment of crisis, but it's a moment in which the issues that face young people are very clear. You don't have a draft, but you do have war. You don't have a lot of I think they're murking the waters, but this is a very, what's the right word? Reactionary, retrograde, back to old school, white supremacist, racist thinking. I mean, I can see it, and when you bring somebody like Jeff Sessions, it's like, okay, I don't want to be prejudiced. But it's very hard to look at Jeff Sessions and see him as the kind of person you want to be in the Department of Justice as your Attorney General, because I see Jeff Sessions, and I'm not doing this personally because I don't like, but I see him and I see the connection with the Klan and then Alabama, and it's like, wait a minute, this is not the way we want to go. Anyway. That's enough. Let's go to the Q&A. And I'm very happy to be at NYU, and thanks so much to Ahmed for insisting and working and emailing. This has been going on for what, 5 or 6 months of email to get me here.
So I think we really want to first center the conversation in the moment that we're having right now. I think that throughout tonight's panel, a little bit like I was saying to the professor earlier, a lot of us in the audience, or a lot of us who are people who call ourselves part of the movement, or organizers, or activists, etc., I think that we look at the Panthers in a very nostalgic way, almost as our icons, right? But there's also a lot of information that we haven't gotten. We've almost learned about the Panthers secondhand. You know, we learned through documentaries, we learned through what we've read, what we're trying to look for. And so tonight, I hope throughout the conversation, we're gonna talk a lot about what we're facing today in comparison maybe with what you guys were working on, continue to work on, etc. And so the first question is to center the moment right now is, how do you see this political moment? You know, a lot of us in this audience, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people are looking at the time right now and they're like, damn, like, you know, this is the hot, like, you know, almost like the hottest we felt it, etc. But does it feel that way to you? What does this moment feel like to you?
It feels backwards. It's like we're going back in time. Jeff Sessions comes from another era. Trump comes from another era. The 50s, it's their style, their way of thinking, their form of open, sort of simple-minded racism. They say things and do things that they, let's put it this way, they have not adopted that era of being politically correct. That's not their style. And they also, it's disturbing that they seem to be so incompetent. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe it's good, given what they think, that they're incompetent. But I think I listen to the news pretty regularly. The newscasters are embarrassed to have to report the things that they have to say about someone who's the president of the United States. So I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's probably a bad thing. But one of the things that I would hope is that the social and political problems that the country is facing and the awareness of this current generation would combine to generate a very strong resistance. One thing I will say is when the Black Panther parties began to organize in Oakland, we did create an advisory committee of older people who had other experience. One of the members of that committee was Maya Angelou and some of her friends, and there were other people who were adults, and there was an advisor who was very, very important to us named Earl Neal. He was an Episcopal priest. He gave us his church. There's an artist who has done a painting of the Panthers, and in there there's Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver, Huey Newton, a young brother named Jimmy Charlie, somebody I don't know, and Father Neil with his collar. Now, so in the imagination, he's a Panther too. I mean, he did everything to support us. So what I wanted to say is that the Black Panther Party was structured as an organization, but it was also a community movement. And so there were people who were supporters and there were people who were members. And the young kids I lived in the Fillmore district of, Eldridge and I lived in the Fillmore district of San Francisco. And when I was a little kid, their age, we used to go out and play cowboys and Indians, okay? I don't know, maybe you're too young for that. But in San Francisco, in our neighborhood, the little kids would go and play Panthers and pigs. We did capture the imagination of the youth.
My question is, how do you see the progression of the Black Liberation Movement, specifically in regards to what we consider the movement for Black Lives, which is our current movement? What has changed, and what do you see as setbacks and as progression? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess it's an advantage that J. Edgar Hoover is in the past. You know, he was the lead activist toward destroying this movement, and he was extremely racist. I mean, he was so racist. He was very disturbed that he had actually black ancestry in Mississippi, and a young woman who wrote a book about that said her uncle told her, you know, there were two people in a town in Mississippi who were his relatives. And he made sure that when he became head of the FBI that they ended up dead, so no one could tell. So we don't have that to deal with now. We don't have that kind of racial terrorism of that ilk, and you know, people who are multiracial, people who have different identities. It's okay. It's okay. But it was not okay in J. Edgar Hoover. He was born in 1896. It was not okay. On one hand, I think you'll see openness, particularly openness on issues of gender and openness on issues of maybe political choices. However, there's a lot of rigidity when it comes to the structures of white supremacy. Look at the prison system. It wasn't until the 70s that the prison system began to increasingly lock up young black men, and there's a huge spike. It starts about 71, and I think that's the era of, is that the era of Bush or Nixon? Nixon. Okay, shortly after Nixon comes in, this concept of arresting young black men way out of proportion to their role in the population began, and it has not stopped. So you can look at the Civil Rights Act and look at the laws that are passed and look at the issues of challenging racial discrimination, but then look at what's going on in the prison, and it's like horrible. It's worse then than it was in the 70s. During the Vietnam War, there was an enormous amount of awareness around the world of American, what we called American imperialism, because they were murdering people. The kinds of young people who joined the Panthers, I discovered from a documentary, they're the same kind of young Vietnamese who became members of the liberation movement. And so there were liberation movements in Africa. There was a liberation movement against the French in Vietnam. And the climate of acknowledging struggle, acknowledging the right to become independent was very lively. What's happened is, what do you call that? There's the revolutionary, and then there's the stabilization, and then there's the return to capitalism, essentially. And so I think we're at that point where in countries that have become independent, become powerful, become leaders in revolutionary struggle, have now sort of settled into a more comfortable relationship with the world economy. And so those who are attempting now to take very radical action find themselves in a as you might have noticed, in a weaker position than during the Vietnam War. And I don't think we should bring back the Vietnam War. I mean, that was the most atrocious, murderous time of all. Because of Vietnam, and because of so many soldiers who went, or those who decided, why do I want to go die in Vietnam? I might as well stay here and fight for black people and die here. But that ignited the liberation movement in a way that I don't think anything else would have, because really it is a matter of life and death, and it was not a question. This is not a question, is it a matter? No, this is a matter of life and death. And there were a lot of people dying in Vietnam. It was the first time that the United States Army ever enlisted so many black soldiers.
I get that, like, during the Vietnam War, the stakes were much higher. You know, people were getting drafted, people were going over to the war. But can you speak to a little bit about, I guess, like, why is it that maybe people are so apathetic to the wars that are happening today? I mean, we've been under
There's
war
no
for a
draft.
decade. Yeah, just, there you go.
They don't have to go. You only get in the military if you volunteer. So that would change the dynamic completely.
Do you find that there are, like, maybe other structures, or like the fact that like I would maybe say that, like, although we are still at war, the public consciousness of the fact that we're at war is far less.
Well, that's a very interesting point. You said public consciousness.
Yeah.
Don't you understand that once the government observes how people respond to the televised versions of the Vietnam War, they've all made the decision that you will never, ever see that again. There is no active TV footage of whatever the wars are in the Middle East that you will see, ever. And in fact, they've been able to enhance and increase their ability to distort and conceal and disseminate what they're really doing. So you say there's a downs. Well, maybe they're not getting the information. They're not getting the truth that would make them furious.
I think I just want to journey back a little bit to when you were directly involved in witnessing the international expansion of the Black Panther Party.
Witnessing, I was actually practicing the international expansion.
That's their language. And so, and you touched on it a lot. Like, speak to if you could, speak to the importance of internationalism and international community building.
It's extremely important, and it's not that easy. However, during the Vietnam War, it was a lot easier because so many governments, like the government of Sweden, the government of France. France had already fought twice in Vietnam and got defeated twice. They were not supporting America in Vietnam. So you could be a fugitive and you could go to Sweden, or you could be a fugitive from the draft, you could go to Norway, you could go to France. There was a welcome to soldiers. Now in West Germany, this is one of the biggest military bases in the United States. So West Germany was a hub. Well, they called it West Germany then. It's no longer that country. But I was invited by a group called United Black Soldiers to come to Germany and give a talk. And I was told when I came to the airport in Paris that you can't get on that plane. You're not going to let me. I said, I have a ticket and I'm going to get on the plane. So I had also my son, who was about 1, and a sister. So we were running to get on the plane, and the French authorities were running to tell us we couldn't get on the plane. So we get on the plane. We get to Frankfurt, and then police came on the plane and took my traveling companion, Barbara Easley, because she had a big afro, and on the posters they had a big afro, but my hair was cut, so they just left me there. And then they came and they said, well, you have to get in this car. And I said, well, who are you? And I said, well, no, they took me to the police at the airport, and then they said, well, who are you? I said, I'm Kathleen Cleaver. Well, she's in there. No, I'm Kathleen Cleaver. So it's comical, but it's not. So they said, okay, well, now you're expelled. But they wanted, what is it going to, they send you back to the country you came from. But I had come from Algeria to France, and they couldn't get any flights. So they just sent me back to Paris, and the police held me hostage in their hotel. And then I went back to Algeria, but then I came back again. I snuck across the border in Switzerland, and they drove me across the border. Hold on, let me find you this picture. I was able to get into West Germany and talk with the group that was supporting the Black Panthers, and Cobby Wolf and his group that was a very activist support to defend some black prisoners there and make connections with the Black Panther Party and the Rote Army, the Red Army faction, and others in Germany. So we actively practiced and participated in international collaboration. We needed their support. They wanted to support us. And the overall horror and atrocities of Vietnam pushed us together. in ways that I don't see anything pushing international solidarity. Well, it's not an emergency. You know,
Yeah.
There's reasons for international solidarity, but it's not as lively as it was when so many people were dying every day in Vietnam.
I think for us as people in the movement, we also like recognize the idea of having international solidarity. So it's
Yeah.
like we have the Dream Defenders who like visited Palestine on a trip, right? Or we understand that in our movements that we want to talk about North Dakota Pipeline, the indigenous struggles in the United States. We want to talk about the border security, etc. Where refugees are coming from. There's like so many complex global issues that we want to bring into our movements and stand in solidarity with. I kind of just like maybe give us some advice on how do we build these these coalitions, etc. Or what were the conversations you guys were having about? Or is it just like you were learning about each other? Were you trying to build out points with each other? Where how do we do this?
Well, first of all, you decide to do it, and then you decide to have people who will help you do it. For example, if you're against the Dakota Pipeline, there's a huge organizing effort there already. I mean, you can reach out to the organizers of preparing it. In fact, they had a huge standoff that, about 4 weeks ago, my neighbors next door went there, came back. It's a focal point. It draws people from all over because it's so clear. It is so clear that this is indigenous people's land and they do not want their water poisoned. But they're up against multinational corporations that have billions of dollars and want to make more billions of dollars in profit. So we might call this an uneven struggle. So I think the one of the principles that the Black Panther Party acted on very, very regularly was forming coalitions, combining your energy with other movements or other groups so that you enhance and one of our first coalitions was with a group that wanted to get on the ballot so they could run candidates, and it was called the Peace and Freedom Party, except in New York where I think they call it the Freedom and Peace Party. But that was a coalition, and some people, oh, what's wrong with you? You're supposed to be a black organization, and you're collaborating with white people, blah, 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 blah. There was a lot of inability to recognize the importance of collaboration at a moment when people were very excited about black consciousness and black awareness and black independence, and somehow or other, if you collaborate with the Peace and Freedom Party, which the principle of working was, Eldred said, come and help us with material resources. We need sound trucks, and we need this, and we need so-and-so. And if you provide that, we'll allow you to come to our rallies, and you can get people to sign up your petition. You needed 60,000 signatures to get on the ballot. So they provided us material assistance, and we provided them signatures, and they got on the ballot. And in fact, they're still on the ballot. But you have to be committed to your objectives and recognize that collaboration with people who may have similar but not the same objectives is key. And you learn something. I mean, I don't know how, this is New York, so New York is a little more sophisticated than some places, I believe. Huh? Okay. The Rainbow Coalition originated in Chicago. The Rainbow Coalition was a combination of groups that included the Black Panther Party and the Young Lord Party, which is a Puerto Rican group, and the Native American organization, and Asian organization, and Chicano organization. So that was actually what the name that came out of Chicago was, the Rainbow Coalition. We had these coalitions, and so I think what's key is commitment to change, commitment to struggle. It has to become the important thing in your life, your private life, your personal life, your real life. So it's one thing to, well, I say that because I've been doing this kind of agitation for a long time, but I like it. I mean, I want to see change. I like the people who I mobilized with, my best comrades and some of my oldest friends. I know because we're working together in movements. My parents were activists in the civil rights movement. Many of my early friends were also, because we lived in Alabama, and there was was it Tuskegee Civic Association and Montgomery, the Montgomery Improvement Station. So we were brought up to challenge racism, to build resistance, and many people, they do it for a while, but some people do it for a lifetime. But you have to do it. I mean, that's and it's joyful. I mean, it is. When you realize you're putting your energy into making something in the world that's bad, trying to make it a little better, you're not going to completely 100% succeed, but you will succeed in raising that issue. You will succeed in learning something, and you will succeed in ultimately. One lady came up to me at a talk I was giving. I think it might have been in Chicago. I'm not sure where it was. Anyway, and I said, what we really wanted to change the world. And she came up and said, well, actually you did. So I don't know if we did. But that's what has to be, first of all, recognize the world can be changed. Things that are bad can be improved, raise awareness. And I don't think we're as much of a police state as we could be right now. As we could be. It could be worse. So seize the time.
Piggybacking on the question of international building and multicultural movements and those types of spaces, I think what we're facing right now and for BL and building internationally is the foundation of anti-blackness and these other spaces. And
What do you mean by the other spaces?
in spaces, Palestinian movements or Asian American movements, the underlying ground is at the very bottom. It's like I'm gonna get my people free now, and we might come back for you later, or we don't want to silence your action because it's gonna jeopardize our action, our footing in movement spaces. And so there's a lack of solidarity on those fronts because people use the language solidarity without commitment. And so I think navigating those spaces as Black folks has become more so a sense of, and also the influence of the COINTELPRO and the evolution of what that looks like now to be in a surveillance state. And I feel like a lot of us are focused more so on not being surveilled than actually getting free. And like that's my personal opinion. But what I'm trying to frame in question is how do we navigate those spaces when we're looking for liberation for you're looking for liberation for your people, but you should also be looking for liberation for my people too, like all liberation for everybody who's struggling. So like where's the level of like navigating that space when it comes to Black folks being at the very bottom?
Well, our concept was coalition. Everybody has their own organization. You can work together. You can collaborate. So I think perhaps from what you just said, perhaps because in California, the young men and women, particularly young men who were in high school in the Bay Area, they would have gone to school with Chinese kids. They would have gone to school with Chicano kids. And so when it came time for a Chicano organization or a Asian organization, it wasn't that hard to form a coalition because there were individuals in each who knew each other from high school or knew something about somebody. So there wasn't like a foreigner. I don't know about, I mean, that's San Francisco. I don't know so much about New York, but friendship, knowing people initially is the entree. So if you just coming as, my organization wants to have a meeting with your organization, it's somewhat formal. I mean, there's the informal connections that lead to stronger formal connections. That's what I have observed. And I'm surprised at what you said. I mean, does that mean that people are more into their own groups than willing to collaborate?
In my opinion, I think that's what it is. And I think but it's also a reflection
Well, let me ask you,
of
does other people see this phenomenon? Yeah, so this is what's out there, that like, you stick with your group, and that's your issue, and that's not my issue. Well, that's counter the purpose of, what is important is solidarity. But what's also important is change. If you want to fundamentally change things, you can't all be in one group. And so that means there is a, what do you call it? A resistance against being part of a movement that really wants to make change. Unless it's just my own group. I'll make change as a Japanese American, but I don't want to help the African Americans or something like that.
I think it's a reflection of the influence, especially right now in this particular moment. The political climate is like everybody is kind of grasping at straws and kind of getting on some type of solid ground that leads to this kind of struggle for resources, this struggle for space, and this struggle for mattering. Like I think of indigenous movement like losing their land, you know, and then you have the black community in Flint not having clean water, and then you have 7 countries. One is Sudan, which people forget about, you know, as being a Muslim country, and like why are they forgetting about Sudan when they talk about the Muslim left? It's like, you know, all you see on TV is Arab Americans, not Arab Americans, because they speak Arabic too. Arabic too.
So non-black.
Yeah, non-black Arabs, you know, who are like highlighted on the news channel, and people forget about that. So I think it's that everybody's kind of and you know, the climate movement. So everybody's kind of grasping at straws in this political movement under Trump and the administration, trying to just get some equal ground. I think that leads to some type of resistance because everybody's just kind of like stuck in survival mode.
It sounds like it's a very, very tense racist structure going on. The people are like sort of retreating. That's what it sounds like, retreating into their group and where they're comfortable and not wanting to reach across racial lines, which is essential if you're going to have an American revolution. You can't have only one group in it. I mean, but then that's logic. Maybe the logic does not appeal to people who feel that they're threatened. Well, but that sounds to be the issue, to build solidarity, build support.
I would also comment that I think you were mentioning in the beginning that at the time that the Black Panthers kind of were in movement, there were also like national liberation movements going on all around the world, right? Like decolonization movements, liberation movements, etc. And so like we're at a state right now globally where like state structures have been so entrenched, right? And also like these states are, even after changing leadership, etc., are now still following capitalistic structures, etc. And that is something that's internalized by the people. So, for example, as like non-black Arab Americans, there's Arab Americans, right? You know, oftentimes when I'm critiquing the Muslim communities, like how we speak about Islamophobia or who our representation is, there's this representation that if we just prove to, like, you know, we go on TV and we say, we are, you know, lawyers and we are this and we're like great citizens, that like Islamophobia will go away and not like understanding the state structures, right? And so, and that's something that a lot of people are now aspiring to, rather than there being kind of a global struggle for liberation that is connecting. Maybe at that time, I think it was more palpable. Everyone kind of was, you know, trying to fight these movements and not being silenced by like a majority of their own people who maybe were kind of complacent in it.
There were a lot of people getting killed, and a lot of people dying, and that kind of maybe alters how people think and what is urgent and what. For example, if you're against the war in Vietnam, well, you don't have a white group against Vietnam and a black group. They're soldiers, you know, and their parents, and so that era was. Of course there's racial conflict, and of course there's hostility, but that was less important than building movements to challenge the whole war, or building movements I mean, this is America. American people are conditioned and encouraged to be racist, so you have to go against the grain. And so I'm actually surprised to hear that people are pulling into their own little corners, and I want to work with black people only, I want to work with white people only. That's not going to get you very far.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the whole point, that there's some effort afoot to contain the social justice movements, keep them in their little box, and then you don't have to worry about them.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the idea that now like we're working in like rather than community movements, you're working through nonprofits. There's like an ABC. I think we're asking for less. Like for example, the immigrant community is going to ask for like, you know, like we're gonna be divided into certain identities and certain communities, and then be asked like, okay, we just want a pathway to citizenship, but we're not gonna critique the wars. You know, that's like someone else's battle because we're asking for less. And that's like I think why we're so inspired when we see the Black Panther movement, or we see the movements of that time. They were so bold. You know, just coming out and like asking for things that we kind of can't even imagine to ask for.
Well, the Vietnam War was portrayed on everybody's television. My daughter says, yes, we had to watch this at dinner table. Bombs, killing, you know, so it wasn't hidden. And so it affected the whole culture. So now we don't get to see that. The culture is maybe insulated from the wars. And the fact that there's danger there and that people are actually getting killed. The notion of solidarity comes when you can share the fear, share the passion, share the goals. And so if the information is hidden, you can be under the illusion that certain things are happening when they're not. I don't know. I think it's very disturbing. Very disturbing because there's a fundamental racist element in the United States, and the goal should be to diminish it, to lessen it, to weaken it. But what I'm hearing is that it's being reinforced. It's allowing people to be divided. And so that's a cross-community issue that could be addressed if there's a motive to do. I mean, the Black Panther Party caught a lot of flack because they're collaborating with white people. Oh, Lord have mercy, when we hired Charles Gary to be the lawyer, all the black lawyers in Oakland were furious. This is the biggest case that's going to happen in Oakland. It's the Huey Newton murder trial. And they have, well, our attitude was, well, he's tried 28 murder cases and he won all of them. You know, but no, but race is a handicap or a divider that's very, very prevalent. You have to take it on directly, challenge it, and say, no, that's not what we're going to. But in a way, maybe the Black Panther Party was good at that because somebody's life was at stake. Somebody was going to go to the gas chamber that we didn't want him to go, and he didn't want to go either. And he actually said, I'm going to be tried as Huey Newton, Minister of Defense of the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Okay, well, and he actually eventually. He was not convicted of murder, so he didn't get the death penalty. He was convicted of lesser offense, and he did do some time, but then he got out. And so this strategy, it seems to me you need an anti-racist strategy that works, and some commitment on the part of people to realize that racial divisions are a handicap if you want to change the country. Racial divisions are a benefit if you want to maintain it the way it is. You know, and like some of the most backward parts of the United States, Alabama, my home, they haven't really made a lot of progress compared to some of the others, and part of it has to do with the perpetuation and the insistence on racial exclusion and racial domination. It's backwards, it's a handy, and you're telling me. And so, but that's, I mean, just to critique is not sufficient. You have to have methods and means of people communicating what they share and being part of movements. And one of the things that the Black Panther Party tried was collaboration with groups, not so much. So there's an Asian group, there's a Chicano group, there's a Latino group, there's a white group, and there's a Black Panther. So, but the groups collaborated. We have within your own group, your solidarity, and then you work together with us. I'll never forget one of the more dramatic speakers who we invited to come to Panther rallies was Ray Stiarina. After he had stuck up the courthouse in New Mexico. Oh, he was so handsome and he was so charming. It was striking. But I realized it. The only group outside of New Mexico that seemed to welcome him was the Panthers. We have pictures of him at our rallies, and we have pictures of ourselves, me in particular, with Native people on their protests when Dennis Banks was a fugitive and he was hiding out in California. And so there has to be somebody taking the leadership. We're not going to be bound up by racism, but respect people's willingness, the desire to have solidarity with their own group. Isn't that 50 organization collaboration, what is it called, the Movement for Black Lives? There's all kind of organizations in that. So that somebody's got the idea, but maybe it's not being, maybe it's not sinking down into the mindset of the actual people you encounter.
You brought up the nonprofit industrial complex, and so I'm thinking about the landscape of resistance and what it looks like. And as you talked on it, the things that we face, and some of these things are new: police brutality, racial inequality, discrimination, and then we spoke earlier. Poverty, has been an issue. mass incarceration, became an issue when the Panthers started to rise up. So I would like if you could speak to the rise of liberalism.
Well, let's say
and-
liberalism will never have a revolution. No, the whole point is to keep things cool and everybody in their place, but make it look good. I'm sorry, that's an oversimplification. That's what it seems like to me. Revolutionary change is not done by liberals. In fact, liberals want to pay groups to make sure they don't get involved in revolutionary change. How many people have had that personal experience?
Yeah, we touched
There
on
you go.
the
See,
nonprofit concept that-
there you
that
go.
affected
It's
our
working. That's
movement.
what they do. So the question is, how do you generate? Well, I don't know if you can do this now. The Panthers sold posters, sold this, sold buttons, etc., and kept money and got donations. I mean, we were self-funding. I don't think we ever got it. I mean, no time that I was involved in ever getting grants. I don't know what happened later. They became they went off on another program. They kicked out the revolutionaries and continued with their, revisionism.
Yeah, but I guess
But people have to get serious. They have to be very serious about what the issues are. Once you are serious about what you are trying to change, and you understand that the opposition is stronger than you, so you need solidarity, you need commitment, you have to believe this, you have to want people to join you and support you. And maybe that is considered somewhat intimidating under these present day circumstances. I mean, if you watch the news, it's horrible. These creeps that Donald Trump is bringing to the government. I mean, this is bad.
yeah.
No, it's really bad. It's like the South before they got integrated. I'm sorry. No, it's very. So we're in a reaction. We're in a moment of reaction, and a moment where the reactionary forces and the power and wealth that they have are in the ascendancy. So it's the time to strategize.
Well, can I, maybe, this is my own curiosity, if you could suggest, or just maybe we'll think together about some other models or other ways to envision how we are organizing our communities right now. I was speaking on behalf of someone who I have a nonprofit job. Nonprofits are something that came up within the past few decades as they're providing services for our communities, actually taking the model that even the Panthers had of providing services as a way
No, that's a different model. Their
no,
model
that's
is
what I'm
different.
saying. I'm saying almost co-opting, right? Or I'm not necessarily saying it's the same model, but so it's the way that people enter movements these days are through nonprofits.
Well, there you go. You're not going to get anywhere. The nonprofit is structured into a tax program, a surveillance program. The Black Panther Party was not a nonprofit organization. It was an association, okay? And I'm trying to think, did I have a nonprofit? No. No, there was a collaborator of mine. We wanted to create an organization. And first of all, to have a nonprofit, it's 18 pages of paperwork to begin with. So forget that. We created a partnership. It's very simple. She's a partner, I'm a partner. We get a grant. It goes to the accountant that gets the grant had created something for artists who don't have organizations. So he had
a fiscal sponsor.
a fiscal sponsorship that if you're only one person, but we were actually two lawyers, but we created a partnership because we don't want to have this whole nonprofit. The whole nonprofit structure is to limit the ways in which you're going to function because you're more concerned about renewing your grant and pleasing your donors than changing the world, in my opinion.
But do you discourage people then from?
I would never do a nonprofit myself. I mean, because I know what
No,
it's
it's
for.
cool. It's really nice. Since we're talking about the moment of Trump, how you've seen maybe the past couple of movements that have risen up, your views on the Women's March that happened post-Trump, or even the campaign before Trump came, it's kind of the Bernie Sanders campaign.
Oh, I love the Bernie Sanders campaign.
Just your thoughts, coming forth as
You know, he's my age. It's like, oh yeah, Bernie, go. I mean, he's like a Peace and Freedom Party person. Yeah, there was no way the Clintons were going to let that happen. So I'm just very disappointed. I think Bernie represents what is better, but there's a whole nother crew that's not going to make, it's going to make sure, even if you're a Democrat, you're not going to get what's better. So the political structure is, I don't know whether to say repressive or oppressive. They have another agenda. It is not social justice. If you think you're working for social justice and you're in a nonprofit structure, you will come across limitations pretty quickly. Oh, I can't do this because of that. I can't invite you because of that. We can't go here because of that. So you're submitting yourself, and it makes sense that people want resources. They want to have, you know, offices. So you have, I think, people need to be far more questioning of what a nonprofit is and where is your activist wing that is not connected to the nonprofit. So you need to restructure and rethink. It's not to benefit social change. It's to benefit something else. In fact, in many cases, it's for the huge corporations to make it seem like they can do something nice for people every now and then.
Or give grants and
Yeah.
Relationship with companies. Yes, there's a lot of different resistance movements that are rising now, kind of, and just in reaction to Trump. So we've seen the many marches on Washington, the many calls to action that have risen definitely since the inauguration happened, and then folks kind of become more reactionary. What is did you guys ever experience like a kind of uprisings that were simply reactionary to what was happening to the level of political change that, like, as we were experiencing?
Well, the time was very different. I remember sitting in a circle with some Panthers when the news of what was happening in Detroit in 1967 was bombing. I mean, the whole city was blowing up. There was snipers from the roof that went on for more than a week. They sent General Westmoreland with the 82nd Airborne Division to Detroit. I said, you know, Westmoreland, they don't call Westmoreland for put down a riot. Even though when they call it a riot, it was a rebellion. In fact, that man I mentioned, Geronimo, he was in that 82nd Airborne, and he was among those people who Westmoreland sent back to Vietnam for another tour of duty because he was so angry. He was supposed to be discharged. He was so angry that these black soldiers made it possible for the snipers to get some more ammunition from the armory and some more weapons. That's the story I first heard. Subsequently, I heard, and he was out there helping them, which meant other black soldiers were doing that. So they had a battle in Detroit against the army that had started out as a rebellion. This is a very, very intense moment of challenge, and that's when I was in the Black Panther Party. We were very excited. We said, this is revolutionary. This revolution is going to continue. It took probably 50 years to build up to that level of intensity, but that's when I was young, and that's when the party came into being, and so we rode that rise of resistance that was connected, intricately connected to what was going on in Vietnam with the soldiers going and coming back and the anti-war, and there's just a huge sense of this is the wrong way to go, and so there was popular support for what was going on. I don't think you have that moment. This is not that moment. This is a different, slower, more cautious, and less radical time. That doesn't mean it doesn't require revolutionary action, but what that means is you're not going to have that explosive reception because people are not in the state that they were when there was an international war going on in which they knew they might die. I think that changes your calculation. So also, there wasn't a huge amount of nonprofit opportunities at that time. That also changes the dynamic. Not that I have a solution to change that, other than you can't rely 100% on the nonprofit. That could be like a funder, but you need mobilization, you need activism, you need challenge, you need people to be able to think and question everything. He said, oh, but if we do that, then we'll lose our grant. So, well, then don't have the grant. I mean, the grant is over here. But do you think when Moncada, the landing in Castro and his boys came from Mexico to come back to Cuba, they said, oh, can we get a grant? No, they had weapons. They had a plan. This is to take over the country. You know, they're not trying to get a grant. They're trying to get a hold on the power in that country. And once they got it, boy, did they keep it. But that's a very small country. America is huge. America is absolutely huge. It's enormous. In fact, somebody sent me an email saying, I think it should be divided up into 5 countries. Because, you know, there's so all these, I said, well, I think that's crazy, but I didn't answer. But, no, but the differences in the structures all around this country are so conflicted. So, if you want a revolutionary change, you have to be able to have something that a majority of people can agree needs to be changed. And I think, from what I've observed now, maybe it wasn't true during Vietnam, but now it seems like women's mobilization is more radical than it has been and offers a lot of opportunities for organizing. That's what I've observed, but I don't know if it's accurate. We don't have a draft, so the only people who go in the military are people who want to be in the military. And so what will be the stimulus to make people devote their lives to radically transforming the society? Which it definitely needs radical transformation, that's not the question. But the manner in which you encourage and mobilize people to participate in that struggle, that's the question. And if the answer is nonprofit organizations, it's going to be hampered. It's going to be limited to a certain amount. Liberals don't make revolutions.
Okay. In regard, you just brought up women and women organizing and how that's been the more radical spaces that you've seen, and people most often say that the Black Panther Party was
they're sexist, right?
Sexist,
You're right.
Censored men more than women, and women were allowed to speak, and
well, that's not true.
All
women were allowed
things.
to speak. I know. I spoke all the time. The portrayal of the Black Panther Party is conditioned by who is making this portrayal. Now, when you hear that they are sexist, who tells you this? Did you hear this coming from the Panthers? Who says a black? Well, all men at some level are somewhat sexist because they're proud of themselves and they want to be men and they don't want to be women. But that doesn't mean the organization is sexist. I mean, I was the first woman on their central committee, the first central committee that they had. It happened to be formed in my house. So Eldridge and I and Bobby Seale and other people were sitting in my living room talking about forming a central committee. If they were sexist, they said, well, you sit over there and then watch us. No, well, I wouldn't have done it anyway. But I think people are too quick to assume sexism in certain organizations. The Black Panther Party was a very macho organization in certain respects because men were armed and they formed those structures that had military terms. But women were armed and women were in these structures as well. In what I've discovered, because I came from the South, the women who grow up in the South have a different take on sexism than women who were living in California. Or feminist, sexism, whatever, whichever. But anyway, I think that that's something to work on, but it's not an obstacle to organizing, and it's not something that you need to go tripping about. That's my opinion. At least that's how I have it.
Yeah. So in our movement, there's a lot, and I think many movements. Right now, there's a lot of focus on censoring Black women leadership as the focal point.
What did you say, censoring or centering?
Censoring.
Oh, that's a different thing. Okay.
And uplifting women's leadership, and definitely censoring experiences of Black women and queer and GNC, gender nonconforming, and trans people. And as you just spoke, your own experiences like that, women were heavily involved in leadership. So my
One of
question
my
is,
friends said women ran the Black Panther Party.
well, women did run the Black Panther. I mean, like every documentary I've seen, like the women were, they came out first, So, I just want what are your reflections on that being kind of a strategy of ours today, is to center women leadership today in a visible way. Do you have any thoughts on that, or is it working in our favor? Is it working against us? Help
Well,
us win a little bit.
the way I think I focus on problems, and I don't focus on who is the gender of the person that's going to be solving these problems. That's not the way I think first, because it doesn't make sense to me. And I think that when you become very very concerned about what's the body and what's the sexuality of the person who's in leadership, the issue is, where are they leading you? What is the concept? What is this organization about? What are your goals? That's how it seems to me to be a pragmatic way to approach it. But I think what has come about as a means of, it is probably intended to expand liberation, but I think it tends to inhibit discussion of goals and methods when you're very, very worried about what happens in the gender issue. That's just what I observe as an outsider to this concern that you have. From what I read and what I see and how people talk, could be because growing up in the South and growing up in Alabama during the era of the bus boycotts and the demonstrations and women were just as involved as men. I mean, it was a very scary move. I didn't realize how scary it was. I just wanted to be in it. It was fabulous. I wanted to get there. The first people that inspired me were girls in Albany, Georgia, who were protesting and demonstrating and challenging segregation. I said, oh, that looks like a police thing. I mean, if these teenage girls would go out and protest, and the pictures I saw, they were in the back of a paddy wagon singing, going off to jail. Well, horrible things actually happened to those girls, and people didn't even know. They took them off to a old prisoner of war camp in the woods. It wasn't even a jail. It was horrible. There were horrible things that happened to women in the civil rights struggle that a lot of people don't know about. But I observed a woman leader named Ruby Doris Robinson, and I observed these girls. So it was no question I could do this. It's like, I want to go, I want to be in it. And I never questioned whether I can do this because I'm a girl. I mean, that doesn't make any kind of sense. So I think maybe it needs to be combined with practical notions of what is this movement, what are your goals, instead of how is this movement enhancing or not enhancing the position of its women members. That's the way I think.
Yeah, I want to push on the question a little bit. I think that something that we face as movements is that we are dealing with a lot of external repression coming at us, but internally we still have our shit to deal with. We have I talk about my own community, right? We have to deal with anti-blackness in our community. We have to deal with sexism in our community. We have to deal with ABC internally, but we're still fighting a huge repressive systematic force, right? And so what happens is that internally oftentimes we get caught up with the work that we have to do, right? Or it divides us, it hampers things, but there's a lot that we're fighting as well. And I don't know if that's something you guys were facing, you're facing stuff, but internally there's issues as well. And how do you keep a united front? And how do you continue to work on those goals and issues while handling what's going on internally and trying to handle those attacks?
Well, you have to have a practice. You have to have, either you meet at this time and you discuss these things. You have to have some way of processing collectively what you're talking about, instead of, just saying, well, this is a problem, but we're going to go ahead and do things anyway and leave this problem, what is it, the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that it requires a lot of discussion, open discussion, and because if there are people who hold positions of authority and positions of leadership, and they assume that they're entitled to that because of their gender, maybe they don't even want to talk about it. Maybe they never even thought about it. But it's conflict resolution. I'm not very skilled at that. But there are people who know how to do conflict resolution and have sessions and have programs, and it seems to me that from what you're saying, that's part of the movement building that you should be participating in.
Like mechanisms.
Oh no, yeah, we totally. I mean, we totally in my chapter. We totally believe in and operate off of trust and relationships as our base for everything that we do. Our base is trust and relationship building, and so the same members who came back from Ferguson are still our core team members because we have that relationship. And folks kind of give us slack because we haven't really opened our doors so freely, but it's because we have built together this solid network of folks, and we have our supporters and we have our coalitions that we work with. But we definitely have a community, what we call a community of practice.
Excellent.
That's
it.
Yeah.
Community of practice.
Yeah,
If
that's
you
how
have
we-
a community of practice and your focus is on what it is you want to accomplish collectively. And then that will be key to how the leadership function. I mean, you're going to have arguments, and then people are going to get pissed off. But that's part of movement life, in my opinion.
Is it fair to ask people to stay in for a lifetime or to opt out of a lifetime? Like,
What do you mean, stay in what?
to stay into movement spaces, movement building, like.
People make those choices.
Um,
They choose to be in movement. And there are people who will be in movement their entire life because they think that's wonderful. They love it. There's nothing they'd rather do. There are other people who come in a movement, they do a few years in that, then they go get their degree, then they go become a lawyer or a doctor or whatever and move on, but they remember those times fondly. I don't know. I mean, I think those are choices that individuals and collectives have to make. There are groups who whole family are in movement their entire life, but then they have an organization that sustains that. So if you don't have that kind of sustaining organization, it might be difficult, yeah. One of the men who was in the FLN who was responsible for us came and told us, well, we want you to know that they've installed a new transatlantic phone line here so that, you know, essentially they can spy on your conversations in Algeria. It was perpetual. I mean, you know it's there. We have little codes that we might use. We're talking on the phone. The kind of surveillance is tricky, though. It's like when we get messages from someone who we can't answer. And I'll never forget this one. It was sent, somehow or other I have a picture of it in a little typewriter thing. But anyway, the message was supposedly from Big Man, one of the Panthers. He says, Kathleen, there was a rally being held in Oakland to free Huey and whatever, and I was supposed to come as a speaker. And Eldridge wasn't sure whether I should go or shouldn't go, and we get a message from Big Man that says, Kathleen, Eldridge, if you value Kathleen's life, don't let her come to Oakland to speak at this rally. So, and it's signed Big Man. I said, well, is it from Big Man or is it not from Big Man? But we've been kicked out, so we couldn't communicate. Eventually, I figured out it was not from Big Man. And then finally, I saw him, and I said, Big Man, did you ever say, hell no, I didn't see, I know how to send you a message. So surveillance is confusing because you don't know when it's legitimate and when it is and who's doing it, but you just know it's being done and you have to just use your instincts and the kind of people who show up. If you have a site like the Black Panthers did in Algiers, people were coming all the time to visit us, to interview us, to record interviews, etc. So you know some of them are police, but you just don't know necessarily which ones. You kind of have to use your instinct.
I'm a teaching artist and a curriculum writer for Tribeca Film Institute. And the next statement might be a little shocking. I just did 25 years in prison and came home and got this position based on my motivation. Right now, I'm responsible for writing a study guide, Stanley Nelson's film, Panther, Vanguards of the Revolution, and I just wanted to know your take on it.
Well, I was a consultant. Let's discuss it. I was a consultant for the film. What I will say is that there have been a lot of documentaries. I was involved in finding them and showing them, and one of my favorite was a little short film. It was called, I can't even remember. It was just a very short film shot in Oakland. We worked a lot with film. So it's a good film because, in particular, he was able to get the money to buy all the footage there was. I mean, Stanley could not have shot the film in Chicago. Stanley could not have shot a lot of that stuff. He wasn't even there, but he could buy the footage. And so you have a very good, what's the right word? Overview. That's what I would say. It's an overview. And things that are, for example, there was a split in the Black Panther Party, and it was discussed. Huey Newton called, and Eldridge talked, and they had a long conversation, which I have a complete recording of. And at the end, Huey kicks Eldridge out the party and calls him all kind of names, etc. And so I said, Stanley, you didn't put any of that. He put like the beginning of the conversation in the film. I said, Stanley, you didn't use that tape I gave you. He said, that stuff was X-rated. You want my film to be censored? You know. Then I realized, oh, yes, public school teachers are going to show this. Yeah, he shouldn't have. But so I think it's a very well done film, and I'm really pleased that so many people get this sort of balance. I mean, he tried to balance the story, which is kind of crazy because revolutionary movements are not balanced at all. I mean, there's all kind of crazy things that happen, and things that you want to happen, things that you don't want to happen, things through infiltrators, and at some point, sometimes people just can't take much more stress, and they flip out. That's what happens in all the movements. I mean, it's unique to the Panthers. It's in Africa, in Asia, whatever revolutionary struggle that some people break because the stress is too much. But anyway, Stanley did a very good job.
Thank you for coming. I just want to touch back on the discussion you guys were having. It might have been the second or third question. It was about creating a collaborative space between different organizations. It seems like the time that the Black Panthers were active, it seemed like there was an international cooperation going on, and some of it might have to do with a lot of new nations coming about, fighting for independence, et cetera, et cetera. Like, my background is Somali, so I'm ethnically Somali, and there's pictures in Somalia of like women marching for Angela Davis, getting her free. So I don't know what has changed during the times. Like, now it seems like we're just going pigeonholing back into our respective spaces. Maybe if you can give us one or two suggestions or takeaways to how to come together more.
Well, what I think you have is governments have observed that period of tremendous solidarity. They don't want to see it again. And the governments that allowed it to happen are no longer in power. That era, well, Ben Bella and Ben Barka and Nkrumah and Nasser and these kind of leaders who were world-class freedom fighters and leaders of their countries, that's the era that allowed that kind of collaboration you're talking about. That's behind us. Seems to be.
So we're on our own?
Well, it's a new phase. You know, it's like they regenerate. Who was the president? It was Johnson. President Johnson was the president during the Vietnam War, right? Now, I'm not convinced that he was a great human rights activist, but he sure looks like one compared to the president we got now. This is retrograde. And so I don't know about in other countries, but the era of uprising and transformation and revolutionary change all go along the Vietnam War and what was happening in Vietnam. That's the grandparents' generation. You have two more generations now, and there's been a lot of cool out and ways to figure out how can we prevent that from happening. One, no draft in America, period. If there is a war, no live pictures on television. You know, so there's an effort, conscious effort to make sure that the things that this government is doing will not inspire uprisings. And I don't know about other governments, but that's part of what you're dealing with. So that to inspire people to participate in dramatic efforts to change the society requires a way of inspiring them that doesn't depend on the media, or that you have to use a different media.
Can I comment
Sure.
as well? I think I agree that we don't always feel the same amount of internationalism that like we have seen. Although I think that it's also present, but there's been a huge criminalization of activists and a securitization of like the borders that we can cross to communicate with each other. So technically, like we have probably more abilities to communicate than ever before, like through internet, etc. Right? But these days, if you're an activist, right, you're on a no-fly list. probably, especially in the United States of America. We have like Palestinian activists not allowed into Palestine. And it's not just like Palestinians, right? It's any type of student who has put up a statement, they get put on a list, and you know, they may be black, they may be whatever, they're trying to go into Palestine, they're stopped from going in. There's definitely like a securitization of our borders and our abilities to, I think, connect physically with one another in ways, I think that like, yeah, there's more surveillance, etc., of our conversations, etc., these days, and that deters us. Although I think that there is a presence of that solidarity for one another, but we're not probably feeling it in the same room, right? Because you probably have people tweeting something about someone or something, right? But it just feels less to us a little bit because it's not physical. I'm just 24, it's my comments, I don't know. But like, I don't know, I feel like it's not totally non-existent.
I definitely do agree with you. So currently right now in Somalia, there's a severe drought going on. And it seems like, I don't know, maybe I'm being nostalgic of the old times. It seems like whenever there was a cause or, you know, a calling for whether it be Palestine, whether it be FLN with Algeria, it seemed like people were more empathetic and more willing to sacrifice everything that they have to go to those causes or to support whether here or just actually going there and doing the causes.
I think you're right.
That's
I
going.
think you're right.
But now it seems like people are more, I guess, they have more to lose. Whether
Yeah.
They're more
it's,
subdued.
there's more to lose.
And
There's
definitely a
more at
lot more
hand.
like retreating into yourself. And I
Yes.
think there's a couple of things like that we touched on is like there's so much survival mode for everybody that folks don't even know where to look. It's like when I go to sleep at night, I wake up and I'm like in a Mr. Krabs meeting like every single day. And so like the reality of that, but I think that like there's just a lack of ability, and so like there is solidarity, as you said. When we were in Ferguson, like it was Palestinians who were like, "Yo, you gotta use milk, not water." Like that wasn't coming from anywhere else, because it's also people who have experienced and faced that, what they have access to, and what access looks like for other people. Does that make sense? Like everybody doesn't have access to get on a flight to go places. You don't have access to the internet in every country that is struggling with something. And as much as we are privileged, we're definitely still in a surveilled age, if not, as you said, if not more. And so there's kind of more so, people are, I think, in a self-preservation mode more so than there is no North Star. I think one of the main issues with like all the movements is that we don't know where we're going. We don't know who our opponent is. So everybody is kind of playing the tournament for just like one game to the next game to the next game and not looking at like the championship. If I could put it in those terms, people aren't ready to fight imperialism, and people aren't ready for that. People are just trying to survive today and get to the next day. And I think that's where we need to build and branch and collaborate and be in solidarity with each other. Is where's our North Star? Where are we going?
Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. So I would feel remiss, or I would be remiss if I didn't lift up some of the like really dope solidarity and cross movement work that's happening
Excellent.
right now.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So Mi Gente is a national organization of Latinx folks and from across the diaspora. And just last week, they led in organizations like mine, Southerners on New Ground, Undocumented in Black or Undocu Black. They had a strategy session on expanded sanctuary and how we get beyond these narratives of criminalization, like against the respectability bullshit that we've seen from our movements in past. And like what I love about Mi Gente is that they have a firm like read on anti-blackness and saying like this has no place in the work that we do. And then so that's one example. So people should check out Mi Gente. If you haven't heard about them, you should really peep their work. And it's not just some national thing, it's like happening locally as well, in Atlanta and also in Chicago. And these are things like I know like very intimately, like we throw down with people from across communities, the Arab American Action Network, like there are various spaces, but it's not to scale. We need a lot more people involved in that work. So I'm not gonna sit here and say that all of the things are being done everywhere, but that work is it's being done. And so whenever I hear like folks say no one cares about something or it's not being done, it's usually because not enough people know about it, or there's not enough people involved in it, right? Like, I think that there are some people who have great ideas about how we actually tackle the violence against Black trans women, but most people don't know their ideas, but the work is being done, right? And so I think we should, like, that's just like a cautionary thing, because if we're in a room full of law students, I saw everybody clap hands about nonprofits and things like that. I don't know what jobs y'all are going to get after you graduate from law school or whatever that is. It's full of contradictions. Yeah. It just, fucking ACLU just got, what, $25 million? How many of y'all don't want ACLU jobs?
For decades.
They've been getting that money for decades, right?
Maybe they have a friend in the donor community.
Oh, yeah, many donor communities, $25 million. What you don't see, Black Lives Matter, the network, to my knowledge, don't have a $25 million budget. Ain't working with $25 million. But there are groups that I think that are approaching this work in a different way than like the dominant narrative that's out there. But it takes time, like you said, it takes time. I was on that delegation to Palestine. There was a lot of blowback against the Dream Defenders. Now Ahmad Abu Snaid, he's working in Detroit with a National Arab American organization, like doing really, really dope work. But he was like, he cut his teeth in Black-led organizing and has those relationships with people. And so I think we do our movement in this moment a disservice if we don't tell a broader story about what's happening. Because there's some amazing work.
Everything you said, it speaks to exactly the same sort of problems we're having today in community work. I actually just got back from Texas so I organized with NYC's Justice for Palestine, and you guys should also get roped into that. It's a really good organization. We do a lot of community work. We're on Bay Ridge. We're doing like different, we work with Anik Bayan, which is a Filipino liberation group. They also work with Bayan, which is actually in the Philippines. We have a lot of international connections as well. But we've been working on political campaigns that we can do as a national movement and to push the politics of, because in all honesty, NGOs are really causing the death of revolutionary movements. They're really co-opting our narratives. Like, you can't hashtag resistance and share a video of Hillary Clinton and think that that's resistance. That's the hypocrisy, that's the craziness in the world we are. So we have to make that clear distinction between our narrative and this liberal narrative. It's not liberal, it's repressive. It's not, even that word is ridiculous anyway. But a lot of the issue we've been facing as a delegation, we've been doing a lot of cross-network work, and we really want to look at the context of solidarity as global liberation. So this is an anti-imperialist movement, it's an anti-capitalist movement, it's an anti-racist movement. This is not an identity politics movement, which is something we've seen especially recently. The question that I had was that when we were in Texas, a lot of what we were talking about was the national structure, so national SJP, which is Student Justice for Palestine. They really are working closely with NGOs. They even have donors that, work with Zionists and normalize that narrative. So we're having a lot of problems, and we're actually having smear campaigns against leftists doing work and really getting hurt by people in our own community for careerism, etc. So really, we've been working a long time to restructure national movement because they just have a lot of flack and they have more of a reach, like she's saying. But we're wondering, I guess, is that a waste of time, and is it better just keep building? Because we're building, like I said, when we were in Texas, we have different groups there. There's Black militia groups there because now, there's white militia groups that are starting up. This narrative, white supremacist is now coming from being under the wraps, now it's being fully out there. People are mobilizing, and we need to start mobilizing, and we're thinking about how we can move forward in the long run, not just the short run, on anti-imperial lines. So we're starting a national campaign for political prisoners, free political prisoners, anti-recruitment. We're looking at right to resist campaigns. But we're really wondering if we're wasting our time and bothering with it.
If you're doing all that, you're not wasting your time.
But with the national, we're doing that separate from that. They don't want us to bring that into the narrative.
And that's the stuff that needs to be done. That needs to build up your base. And I'm very pleased to hear that, because see, if I didn't hear what you said, I would have no idea that was happening. And that's encouraging to me. I say, wow, there's more going on than I'm aware. And also it's going on in a way that is politically focused on issues of resistance and challenging imperialism, which is, we still have to do that. Although I'm sure the government and many other agencies are very happy they don't hear that discussion much anymore. Maybe they think they've gotten rid of it. But I'm glad to hear that it's still kicking.
I'm really glad that you're here. And because so many of our generation, the best of our generation, mostly didn't survive.
Well, yeah, I go to a lot of funerals, and thank you, I'm glad I'm here too.
I just feel like there were literally thousands of white mother country radicals who were
Yes,
following
right.
the leadership of the Black Panther Party in the 1960s and the 1970s. More important than anything I've ever done as a lawyer was what I was doing when I was a revolutionary. And to the law students here, and I want to hear what you think about this because you're a law professor.
Yes, I am.
But you know, basically, you don't have to work for a 501c3 or for the Civil Liberties Union. A lot of lawyers, you know, will set up their own shingles and go out, and then you'll be your own boss. It'll be scary, but you'll be able to work for the people without having to get a grant, without having to have someone vet who you can represent or who you can't. I've specialized in representing CUNY students. The reason I did that was because the NAACP Legal Defense Fund couldn't represent those students because they'd have to go through a 64-member board to decide whether or not they could take the case, whether they had conflicts, et cetera, et cetera. Civil Liberties Union couldn't do that. I wanted to be the guy who, when the students called up and they said, hey, they're shutting down the Morales Shakur Center, we need a lawyer right away, that I could say, I'm on my way. You know, so I urge you to consider, with all your loans and everything, consider being that. And the other thing I think you need to realize, Kathleen, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, the Black Panther Party had lawyers who would liberate comrades who were in prison. But as far as I know, the Black Panther Party never sued anybody. You know, or certainly I didn't hear about it.
Oh, I got sued. I don't remember the Black Panther. You know what? I have a feeling you may be, well, first of all, it's a waste of lawyer time. If we have a lawyer, we need a lawyer to represent and get somebody out of prison. And it was hard enough. It took 26 years for Geronimo to get out. When he went to prison, I was a Panther, I think, or late. I was in Algiers, I think. So I was a parent, having children. But when he had his 5th habeas petition hearing, I'm an attorney working on his case, and that's the one we finally won. But not because I was there, because it's been 5 years, and because the Los Angeles Superior Court said we're all conflicted out. We can't talk. None of us here in LA can do it. And they sent it to Orange County, and the judge was a retired naval officer. And he said, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. It was very, very clean. He was about to retire. They picked him because none of the others wanted to touch it. They put the guy in the stand who had testified against him, Julio Butler. It turned out not only was Julio Butler an informant for the LAPD, he was an informant for something else, and he was a informant for the DA's office. And he was sitting there on the witness stand testifying against the defense. I mean, well, that was crazy. But anyway, we brought, and the judge, I've forgotten his name, but he had Julio Butler on the stand for 2 days. So he did get his habeas win. He finally won. But after that, he done 26 years in prison. So anyway, well, I'm glad to see you, and glad to for students to see that there's some people who actually become lawyers and do really, really good, kind things.
You cannot be a revolutionary and be a lawyer at the same time. I've been both, and I know the difference. And it is sad, that there are many radical lawyers who don't understand, the difference between supporting revolution and supporting and basically and being a revolutionary yourself. I mean, there was a time when I would do things that I couldn't do and still be an officer of the court. And now I have to be an officer of the court, and that constrains me. So it's something you really need to think about seriously. You need to understand the difference between being a client and being a lawyer, if that's what you want to go on. And if you really do believe in revolution, In my view, COINTELPRO, if you don't know what COINTELPRO was, Google it. But COINTELPRO wiped out the Black Panther Party physically, put people into prison who were, people who weren't killed. It also put drugs into the black community and to the communities, around this country. It also pushed the 501c3 paradigm, to get us to the point where people cannot really think about what it's like to, a revolution is not something you get a grant to do. It's not something you clock out at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
It's something you are 24/7 if you're a revolutionary.
Yeah.
So, and I apologize for saying all this, but it's just that I'm getting to the age now, I don't have that many more years, and I feel that too many people from our generation have not told you young people what you need to know about what was really going down. And that's why it is so good that there are sisters like Kathleen Cleaver who are here, to basically, talk about what it was like to be part of the Vanguard. And the Panthers were the only Vanguard organization I've ever seen in my life.
So thank you for being here, as everyone already said. And there's been a good amount of talk about coalition building and obviously needing a majority of folks in order to really move the movement and allow that to bubble up to actual revolutionary change. But can you talk a little bit about the role and impact, or really just your thoughts on the model of having a fervent group, a group with true zeal for what has to occur and what needs to occur in a revolutionary context, especially in the contemporary moment that we have, where there isn't a cacophony of revolutionary movements going about, where you really can have coalitions where you know that within each of those coalitions, folks have the zeal in order to really move the movement. So can you just speak a little bit about taking the role or the road of focusing not so much on coalition building and compromise that way, but more so just focusing on a small group with the zeal and moving forward with that power.
I want to quote something that Ellen Jackson said. Ellen Jackson was married to James Jackson. They were activists in the American Communist Party. James Jackson, my mother, grew up together. And he was in love with my mother. I don't know if she was in love with him, but her father was a Baptist preacher. And there was no way in the world that the Baptist preacher's daughters were marrying a communist. So it didn't happen. But they were in the Southern Negro Youth Congress. He was in the Communist Party. There was a lot of activism in that era, the 1930s, et cetera. And then some of those people are still alive. Not too many. But what I was going to say is that when a social problem is so crucially and viciously difficult for people to survive and to live with, then lots of different forms will come up of how they want to challenge it, and or how they want to stop people from challenging it. I remember one of my friends was in college at the time I was joined the Black Panther Party. He said, all these people talk about you're being spied on, you're being listened to. Who do you think wants to listen to your phone calls? That was his little conservative attitude, that justified him not paying attention. But there are always going to be naysayers, and then there are going to be people who are for the cause, and then there'll be people over here on the far fringe that are nuts. I mean, and they all come together. It's part of the revolutionary struggle. You can't have everything. Enthusiasm comes in lots of boxes. However, what is important that she said, it's a protracted struggle, which means that there has different phases. I mean, you might be involved in this your entire life, and so you can't just run race. It's not a sprint. It's a long, continual, generation after generation after generation effort to make change. And it's, what did the Mao say, 2 steps forward, 1 step back? Sometimes it feels like that. But the thing that's important is to continue and to increase the numbers of young people who participate, because if there's a war going on or something that's very, very, very dramatic, you'll excite a lot of people. But you can't depend on that to build a revolutionary movement. You have to be consistent, proactive, organizing, and it's not very glamorous. I mean, really. If anybody thinks it's glamorous, you haven't been in a revolutionary movement. It's dangerous, it's hard work, but what is so wonderful is the people. and their commitment and their intelligence and how they make those, the kind of people who make those choices have big hearts, in my opinion. So, and I've met a lot of them, and a lot of them have passed away. But it's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful set of friends, and some of them were not the best friends, but they were part of the revolution. So it's choices that you make. And everybody's not going to make those choices. There was one woman I remember, Asada talked about in her memoir, how she made a point of not having any identification with any of these movements at all. No one would connect her to anything that involved any of the black activity or radical activity, etc. And when Asada needed a place quickly to hide, she went to her house and she hid her. Because it was cool. You know, this is what I'm saying. No one's going to suspect her. In fact, Asada wasn't sure she could stay there. She said, "You can stay here. Don't be stupid. You know, I'll protect you." So it takes a structure of many different kinds of attitudes to actually have a successful revolutionary movement. And some people don't even want to be identified with them. They're there for special purposes, but definitely not to be get on the list of people who need their phone tax.
You two were mentioning, particularly you, about how in the struggle and we're fighting, that black people somehow always tend to be at the bottom of the totem pole. And you were kind of asking Kathleen about, you know, how can we kind of fix this? How can we bring more people together? And Kathleen kept saying, you know, coalition build, you got a coalition build, you can't do things in silos. You know, and that makes so much sense, and that sounds so practical. And I think one thing that we have to realize is that it's a lot more difficult today than 40 years ago, particularly in America, to get groups like Asian Americans on board, to get Hispanics on board. When we look at 33% of Hispanics voted for Trump, when we look at the fact that 40 years ago, Asian Americans didn't have the highest household income in America, despite the fact that today they're still equally as disproportionately represented in senior management positions like CEOs, CFOs, board of directors. They're just as disproportionately represented as black people, as Hispanics in those senior management positions. You know, that elite allows them to kind of be promoted, but still controls them. And they don't realize that they're still second-class citizens. And it's very difficult. Like, I'm a quarter Chinese. I've lived in China. Like, I'll be frank, like, they don't care about black people the same way that we care about other disenfranchised groups. And you're 100% right that in terms of trying to build these groups and build these more coalitions, it's hard. And I think that's something that, like, we need to take a deeper look at, you know, when we're trying to coalition build. Like, those groups of people need to also focus on their groups. And I think no matter what, like, black people are still going to be the impetus and the catalysts that are pushing progress, that are pushing change. But we need our white allies. We need our Asian allies, really, and really more the white allies who are going to be the final change, who are going to be able to push us ahead. You know, we're going to be the impetus of the day. Black women in particular are going to continue to be the ones at the forefront who are pushing it. But it's a lot harder today, I think, to bring those different coalitions together than 40 years ago, when there's a lot more to.
You're right. It is harder because the intelligence agencies at NASA and the CIA and the DIA have studied all that, and they have strategies to disrupt it. They've seen it. In fact, the last thing they ever want to see, and that's why no military operations are on television live. They stopped that immediately. Well, not immediately. They stopped that when we went to Iraq. So they have strategies to protect the establishment and protect their imperial interests, so that what we see will not agitate us to challenge it. And that's been in place for about the last 20 years or so. So we're up against, what do you call it? It's not psychological warfare. It's media deception, mind control.
Yeah,
And you have to recognize it.
I just want to piggyback on the answer and kind of just jump in a little bit. We are not anti-allies. We're not anti-accomplices. We're not anti-coalition building. Actually, our chapter does nothing without being in partnership with at least one other organization. So we are always coalition building. But I think that specifically the question of at whose expense. At whose expense do these chances make, right? So even though facts may say something like 7 black trans women were killed, have 7 black Asian women been killed in the past 2 months? The most marginalized people are black, and at what expense does it come when Akai Gurley was murdered by Peter Liang? The Asian community came out for people in, and there was your rip, and we did have supporters. The name of the organization that came out and supported, Akai Gurley and his entire coalition, but majority of the Asian community was silent and didn't want to pick a side. And so I think that when it comes down to coalition building is not us holding all the space and holding the container for everybody else to get their shit together. Like, it's not on black people to make sure that all other marginalized folks get their shit together. That's not on us anymore. And maybe it never has been, but it's not on us. And it's not at our expense of our lives. Our lives, we can no longer risk our lives and expend our lives on the hope that she'll show up on our side. And so, or on anybody's side, right? So I think specifically, and it's just, it's not on black folks to convince Chinese Americans, anybody else, that they are people of color. It's not on us. And I think building out those coalitions and building out the work, as Professor has said, is absolutely necessary. But that's not a major. It's part of a strategy. It's a tactic that we use in our strategy, but it's not all or nothing. We can no longer look in that way or think in that way.
I wanted to add that 7 black trans women have been killed also by cis black men, and so there's also the concern around the internal issues within the black community and the rampant trans misogyny, transphobia, regular plain old misogyny, sexism, all these things that, I mean, we don't want to sort of air out our laundry with non-black people, but it's conversations that also need to happen within the black movement, and then after the fact, we sort of want to paint this picture of a united black community, which is, it's not the case.
Yeah, in response to that, Black Lives Matter, Baji, BLP 100, ALP, a bunch of us are actually calling a rally action tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. in Harlem, and the conversation and discussion we'll be having at that rally and vigil for black trans women is black cis hetero men and their violence against black women. One of the things I've always said to my best friend is, if you remove all the white police officers from my neighborhood, I'm not safer. I'm not safer. So those are things that we really need to discuss, take care of, and have actual plans around, and strategies around, and practices around. Islam Meadows was murdered 2 years ago outside of a police precinct. A black man bashed her head in on the ground because he was humiliated that his friends found out that he was attracted to a black trans woman. You know what I mean? So we are extremely aware, and if you're interested in uplifting trans women's narrative, and if you're interested in that, definitely connect with us, because that is work that we're doing. And as I said, we're having a rally tomorrow at 4:30 at St. Nicholas Park, and then after that we'll be going over to the Schomburg to the Black Women and Girls Lives Matter speech that's happening with Elle Hearns, who's a black trans woman within the Movement for Black Lives, and Vivian Anderson, who's part of our chapter. But yeah, that's definitely a necessary thing to bring up. I'm really grateful that you did bring it into the space.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for speaking. Thanks to you two for being here. So earlier when you were talking, you mentioned the simple racism, the simple-minded racism of Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump and all those people. And I'm curious. So I see sort of two kinds of racism. There's there is a dichotomy that you can make, which is the sort of simple, simple-minded, straightforward, anti-black racism, horrible, violent, old school, yeah. As opposed to now it is I would say this new school, the new model, which is practiced by many people who consider themselves to be liberal, left-wing, and all this stuff. And it sort of goes along, and it comes up in spaces like PC spaces, safe spaces, anti-blackness is still there, you know? And I'm wondering, so one is clearly a more present danger to people's physical safety, but on the other hand, this sort of new model of PC undercover, more insidious racism creates for insincere coalitions, insincere activists, and I'm just wondering what your perspective is on those two kinds of, I mean obviously ideal world they'd be gone tomorrow, but just the difference between those two kinds, or are they that different even?
Well, I hadn't spent a whole lot of time thinking about new racism versus old school racism. However, that's what you live with. I mean, because the old school are dying out. I mean, how many people, well, in South Carolina, they still have Klan rallies. And they advertise them, and they put up big signs outside the university when a student of mine told me that. But most places, they're not gonna have Klan rallies. A lot of the Klan might be wearing blue uniforms and wearing badges or doing something else. No, I'm just saying, they're not in your face as a member of the Ku Klux Klan. So, there's more and more hate groups. I think there's 1,000 hate groups according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And so we're in a society that's resisting, what do we call this stuff? What are these words you use now? Multiculturalism and
Intersectionality.
Yeah, they don't like any of that. No, and so some of them get. We're in a transition. This culture is trying to make a transition, and there's a lot of old baggage here that doesn't. I think that's why we have Trump in the White House. They don't want to make that transition. They watched Obama, and I said, well, where did all these people come out to vote for Trump? I said, okay, they're the ones, no, they did not vote the second term for Obama. They just said, no, I'm not going to vote. And they wait, and then they vote again. And so this is America. America is known for white racist hostility. It's also known for generous Christian love and support and bringing refugees from all over. So we're dealing with social and economic contradictions in the society. Just make sure you get on the right side, the good side. Because the bad side's going to be out there regardless. What we would like is that there's more communication and more support and more recognition of the benefit of challenging and resisting and eliminating as much as we can this kind of racial hostility or racial division. But it never goes away. You know, that's not the goal, to make it completely go away. It's like to move despite and because. These are the changes that have to make. And people want to do good things many times, but they're afraid. Or they don't have the time. Or they're not certain how their friends will think. So when they have a stronger and stronger example of people making, so well, maybe I'll come to one meeting. It's a protracted struggle to get movements built and to sustain them. And generally, what Rat Brown said, he said the pigs are the best organizers. So they'll come out and do something horrible that inspires people, and you'll have a leap in the movement. And when I say Rat Brown, he's now known as Jamil Alameen. How many people recognize this name? I just want to check. Jamil Alameen. He's been in prison for the last, 20, how long, King? 20-some years?
At least that long.
I remember I was a character witness in his trial in Atlanta, and the trial was set for the same day of I think the World Trade Center bombing or something. So they said, oh, no, we can't have it that day. So they had to postpone it. Some big incident had happened. Anyway, when I was on the witness stand, I was a character witness, and I started talking about him, and then I started talking about the Black Panther. Oh, that's sufficient. They didn't even want my testimony to go into the real issues here, that this was a man who, essentially, that they're persecuting for his politics. Right. He came out of prison, he came back to Atlanta, and it came in 1999, I think is when he was arrested, but it became out in the newspaper that since he'd been in Atlanta, the police had been looking at 14 unsolved murder cases, trying to find one to stick on him. And so the people who are being persecuted are persecuted, put under the garage, under the jail. He's still alive. I just tell you that because some people either have never heard of him or they assume he's dead because he hasn't been making any noise. No, he's very much alive. He's ailing, but he's still a political prisoner. And his wife, Karima Alameen, is still working on trying to get him out. And so I just wanted you to understand that in terms of repression against activists who were in the black struggle and are now Muslim. Yes.
Okay, can you go into really detail about COINTELPRO and the purge of the Black Panther Party and how they really...
What do you mean the purge of the Black Panther Party? You mean the split within?
The split within, and how the COINTELPRO really, how they played a part in it, so that if something ever happens again like that now to other organizations, what they need to look for.
Well, counterintelligence program is something that the intelligence services do. They tried to keep it a secret, but they had an agenda. They had a J. Edgar Hoover had a 10-point platform, 10-point program. He didn't have a platform. You know, prevent the rise of a black messiah who can unify the masses. Okay, that was the first one. Let's make sure that person doesn't live. So a few people were, and they had the candidates. The Black Panther Party wasn't even on their list when the COINTELPRO began, and they wanted to make sure that radical black people did not influence the respectable Negroes, etc. They wanted to make all these little social and intervening things to us to inhibit the growth of the movement, inhibit the respectability of the people who were the leaders of the movement. And they thought that there would be one person that would rise up and unify this movement, and they weren't sure who it was because they wanted to make sure they could get that one. And Martin Luther King became the candidate that they were most focused on. And you see what happened to Martin Luther King. And so there were a couple of attempts on his life through the Dixie Mafia. They didn't make it the first time, and that's why he ended up being murdered in Memphis, because they couldn't get it together for one of their other cities. But we are under horrible military intelligence, surveillance, and attack, whether we know it or not. That's what's out there. You know, you'll see things in smaller communities, you'll see, you know, police informants or whatever. But this is a society that wants to maintain its structure, maintain its economy, maintain its racial divisions stable. And they're going to do what that takes. And so when you join a radical movement or revolutionary struggle, you're disrupting that. You're challenging that. And that's a good thing. But they're watching you, and they're going to respond. Something is going to happen. So that's part of I think that's part of what people are wrestling with, that, you know, how much of that do they want to encounter? And what are the supports that they have to resist against it? Because you end up going to generally need a lawyer. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, why are you doing? My name is Aries, and thank you for being here. For one, I have a question, but before that, I want to make a couple of comments based off the things that I heard. I heard in the room somebody was saying that the white supremacy was kind of hidden and now it's rearing its head. And I think that's only because of the fact that we have actually with Donald Trump as a president, because I don't believe that it ever was really hidden. It was always in our face. It's just some people that chose really not to see it, or they want to use the word white privilege. I just say just being blind. A lot of times, it was right in our face all the time. This is what we live. I've been protesting for over 10 years, and a lot of times people don't really come out. And as far as your question, you were asking about like coalition building, starting coalition. My brother, today marked the 300 sandwich that I gave out to a person. If you want, you can be your own coalition yourself. All it takes is the revolution spirit, which is like they said, you live with that. You wake up with it. And some people they don't. Pardon me. Some people they want. We gotta understand that some people they want to do it because it gets sensationalized in the news. And you get on cameras, and sometimes they now, especially with the social media, you got Facebook activists where you can get a YouTube page or something like that, and next thing you know, you're the next hottest thing. You have to make sure that when you're doing it, you're ready to die for it. You have to know that when you go out there, the one thing that you might lose your life that night when you leave, and until you're ready to face that, then you can't really even want to step into the realm of actually saying that you want to be a revolutionary, because you have to know that being a revolutionary, like they say, is you wake up with that, you go to sleep with that, and you're going to know that you're going to die, whether the plan that you wanted to see is going to come to fruition or not. You have to know that your kids might not see that. The same thing that we fight as white supremacy is a machine, and they know that their children are going to still benefit from this white supremacy machine. So we have to do everything to combat that. Now I work with an organization called Black Lives Matter Greater New York, and we're trying to do things called with the Black Lives Caucus, where we're trying to actually shake up the system within using the city council, knowing that nobody pays attention to the city council votes, and we're trying to actually have people hold local officials accountable. These are people we can touch. We always worried about the presidency, and we're worried about who can do the president, but we have local officials who are in our city, in our boroughs. We can knock on their door when laws are not being passed. We have DAs that are right in the city. We can go there when things are not being passed. These are things that the Panthers set for us. These are things that we really have the template in order to do it. It's about, are you willing to do it? And like I said, do you know that you're going to be, like she said, you're going to be watched. You're going to be put out there. You can't be scared of that. And you have to know that, are you willing to die for it? And now, with that being said, my question was, you brought up COINTELPRO, and we know that COINTELPRO was brought up, broke up the Black Panther Party. With that, that's a lot. I feel like that's one of the biggest reasons why a lot of organizations have problems being unified, because they're scared that maybe this organization or that organization might be the person in that organization trying to bring them down. And so what I've noticed is that, like, I used to work with an organization called October 22nd, and they used to work with organizations sometimes hand in hand at the time when Bush was in the regime. So it was World Can't Wait, Drive Out the Bush regime. Then you had the RCYB, Revolutionary Communists. Now, all these groups came together sometimes, but it's like if a person dies, or if a black person loses his life and win a black liberation fight, why does it take for like news cameras to be outside for all these organizations to come together? Anytime something happens, and any injustice that happens to one person is supposed to be for anybody. So if you feel like you're a part of an organization or you're not, you should be there. That's how I started getting involved in the first place. So I want to know is what is it that the white liberals or the white radicals' role is in the black liberation movement, being that a lot of people within the black liberation movement feel like they can't side or even have allies with certain people that might side with these white radicals because they for fear of being taken over by some kind of intelligence agency or something like that.
Well, I just think you have to work with organizations. You know, the coalition is not necessarily you and this other person, but it's an organization with another organization.
Oh yeah, we work. Well, I work with different organizations,
Yeah.
but I'm just wondering because this is a question I get posed to me a lot because within everybody amongst each other during the rallies, it's always a kumbaya during the rallies. But it's after the rallies and after the organizing where the real, the real bullshit politics come out and people start worrying about their agenda and why they were at that rally and why they were at that march as opposed to what the march was about in the first place.
Well, that might be a testimony to the fact that people don't find themselves facing a dire emergency. So they can have all that little personal stuff going on. But when it's, well, there's a huge world war going on, then it's an emergency. You get the death threats. And when, in the case of the movement in Alabama, you know, young man I grew up with ended up getting shot in the back at a gas station for arguing with a white man over which bathroom he should go to. But he was a person under threat. He was a very, very active organizer. This is Sammy Young in Alabama. They had the Klan out for him. The threats were out there. They knew who he was. And the particular gas station he went to, the man who was on duty that night, his family's in the Klan. And so he's the one that pulled the trigger. But what I'm saying is you can't, let all that kind of stuff deter you. What is your focus? What are you trying to accomplish? What do you call this? There's people who need to have discussions about their practice, perhaps. But ultimately, we're all gonna hang separately, or else we can hang together and make a difference. That's the collaboration is key. No one group is gonna change the whole country for everybody. And so the black movement had been in the forefront for a long time because the conditions are so atrocious. They're absolutely atrocious. I think maybe after Obama was elected, some people thought that the world was going to be very different. But it's the same world. You know, we're still here. Same stuff. He was a nice guy. He's calm. Let's get back to reality here. And it's a protracted struggle. I mean, you build allies. People who were spent years and years and years and years in prison. I'm thinking of Marilyn Block as one person who passed away. She got out of prison, and I think within 3 weeks she had passed away from cancer. And so, but she was a white girl from Texas, and she was a very definite revolutionary. She actually came to Algiers. I saw her in Algiers and saw her at other places. I don't think you need to, it's the sincerity and the principles that organize people. And it may be that people of certain communities that are less affluent have a stronger commitment to certain principles, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, there's backstabbers everywhere, there's lazy people everywhere, and there's revolutionaries everywhere.
I've actually been told that because I'm a Pan-Africanist that I'm not supposed to be with white people, and that's one of the biggest problems. This is the answer that I'm trying to have. I have no idea why.
Well, there's a majority in America. You want to change America, you might have to work with white people.
Yeah, no, I know that. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. Weird.
You know, well, Panthers say, get over it, you know.
My name is Tyree. I am a Black Panther. I'm a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I'm going to ask you a question ultimately. But we're talking about revolution, and we're talking about an enemy who is experienced at what he does. Now, the enemy has been in power for quite a while, so we can assume that the enemy has a strategy for staying in power. We cannot be a member of any group, you know, and just do whatever we want to do and think that it's revolutionary. If we are at war with another group, we have to know that that other group has a strategy. And in order for us to win, we have to address the strategic planks in the other group's program. That's the way to proceed. To proceed any other way, you're not gonna. It's not gonna work. It's unfortunate, and we have to know. We have to know each one of these planks. We have to know the issue, and we have to know the supporting reasoning behind that. We have to know that, else we will not win this struggle. It's very, no matter how well-intentioned we are, we have to know revolution. And if I had time, I would explain, I would answer all your questions. I've been in this struggle for 40 years. I know more than the FBI, the CIA, the NSA. I'm an electronic engineer, I know psychology and all of that. You know, but it's not my program. Kathleen's program.
Maybe they'll invite you back for a study session.
You know, we're not getting your questions answered now, but know that there are revolutionaries who know the answer to your questions and know how to proceed. Thank you very much. Maybe Kathleen will.
I was in law school at fall from fall of '67 to spring of '70, and in the Bay Area still till early '74. Obviously, I heard you and Bobby Seale in Sproul Plaza. Looking back to the prime Panther days, are there things that you wish you had done differently personally, or that the Panthers had done differently collectively?
You know what? It was so fast. It was so intense. And we were so young. It was an emergency. I mean, I don't, you know, the issue was the life of Huey Newton. And I'll tell you, one day, the first day we got a sound truck, when we were trying to get people to come to demonstrations. So at the courthouse to focus on the trial. And so the sound truck, we played this song by Junior Walker, I can't remember, Shotgun, that's what it is. And making it loud, sound truck, and going through the neighborhood. Come down to the courthouse, see about Hewitt, come down to the courthouse. Come, you know, we had flyers, and this lady leaned out of her door and said, he's going to the gas chamber. He's going to get killed. This is case closed. A black man named Huey Newton, who's a defense minister of the Black Panther Party, killed a white policeman named John Fry. Case closed. He's going to the gas chamber. That's the attitude in that community. So we had to actually constantly work and persuade and build. By the time his case went to trial, there were 5,000 demonstrators outside the courthouse, and coverage is international. But of course, no one anticipated that was going to happen, because we worked with other organizations, with SNCC, with the Brown Berets, with the churches. You know, it was a matter of life. And to me, it was like symbolized the whole problem with America. There's one young black man murdered by a policeman. This is happening over and over and over, and this is an issue of self-defense and survival. And so what the case symbolized was what was the core problem for black people. That's how I saw it. And so a lot of other people began to conclude it was a huge breakthrough, and he did actually not go to the gas chamber. But that doesn't mean the whole society has been changed. That case, we won. But there's a whole lot more cases and a whole lot of other areas for solidarity, communication. Maybe it does take an emergency to make people want to work together. And maybe there's not enough of a sense of an emergency that this place is, you know, killing people. But your law students, or some of your law students, you have a chance to think about this and think about ways in which you can, everybody's not going to join the same organization. Everybody's not going to have the same concept of what needs to be done, but that's where solidarity comes in. You can collaborate, you can work together, you know. Share your differences, share your experiences, and go off on your own group when it's something that matters only to your group. But I'm impressed that so many people are here in this room, and what that tells me is that you're concerned about what's happening, and many of you are probably wanting to do something to change it. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes. All right.
I just want to talk a little bit about coalition voting and creating spaces we've been talking about. So I helped found the Asian Political Collective at my university, and more recently I've been working with people Coalition Against Anti-Asian Violence, the group that was mentioned earlier that supported Pat Gurley. And I was wondering, since I've often had reservations about forming groups and organizing of groups based on racial identity, especially given the contradictions among Chinese Americans that we've been talking about, and the fact that a lot of Asian Americans don't want to identify as Asian Americans, instead want to assimilate. So I was wondering if you think there's actual value in organizing around racial identity as opposed to, for instance, class or other vectors.
When you say organizing around racial identity, do you mean forming organizations that are like Asian American organizations and Black American organizations?
Sure.
Well, I think that's a positive way of organizing because people have a sense of solidarity at the base. Maybe it's not as big as it could be, but at least that, but the way the Black Panther Party saw it is saying you can have each ethnicity, each race, whatever, have your organization, but then you collaborate and form coalitions with other organizations, and so you have you expand the impact of what you're doing. Heard a joke from a Puerto Rican activist who they were in some shooting episode in which the Chinese communist activists and the Chinese the Kuomintang type were in a conflict, and they said, well, which ones are we supporting? He said, yeah, the ones with the Mao button. Okay. You know, this isn't a very complex solidarity. But America is a huge country, therefore, it's possible for you to go off and stay in your own little group. And you don't really have to worry about other people if you don't want to. But that's not going to change things. The purpose of solidarity and coalition building is to radicalize and, you know, pick it up, and actually you might learn things and make new friends. But it's true. It's true. You'd be surprised. One of the organizers in the Bay Area who worked very closely with the Black Panthers was a Japanese American. No.
Richard
Aoki. Richard Aoki. Now, he happened to grow up in the same neighborhood that Huey did, so he kind of knew them. And I think they all went to Merritt. So there were people, they either Huey or Aoki could have decided, I don't want to deal with you. But they didn't. And so I think it's friendship and solidarity enhances liberation struggle. And you learn more things, and you can, also you make, you know, I was very disappointed at the way that Aoki was attacked viciously and accused of being all sorts of things. And there were a group of us that wrote a letter protesting that, a statement protesting, who was it, Ward Churchill, who's a Native American, his wife, Natsu Saito, who's a Japanese American, and me, who's an African American. So that's our group attitude, like, you know, we are all talking about the same thing. We're all part of this struggle. Now we have our own private ties, etc. But this is a huge country, and solidarity and collaboration is a way, in my opinion, you make the biggest impact. I think that's part of why they were so hostile to the Panthers. We don't want to stay in the little black box. We wanted to work with everybody, the whole world, really. But in the Bay Area, we did work with everybody, and so that made it, I think, more problematic than if we wanted to stay in a black box.
Can I also comment?
Yeah, come on.
I think that, like, I understand where you're getting at, in that there are, like, inherently contradictions in every way that we group ourselves, right, to, like, a certain extent, because, you know, sometimes, like, there are actually ways that we've been taught to group ourselves, etc. But I think when it comes to, especially, like, the work of dealing with race and, like, dealing with anti-blackness in our communities, it's just like what was said before. It's not, like, the job of the Black community to come into, like, non-Black communities and teach them about, like, why they have to humanize Black people, right? That's the work that we have to do internally with our community, right? And we're dealing with issues within our own community, and sometimes we have huge majorities who, like, don't even believe that they're a marginalized group, right? And, like, throwing other parts of their community under the bus. It's the work of our, it's our work within to, like, align our community with understanding themselves in certain ways, and then also, like, dealing with, like, the intersections of like the issues that we're dealing internally, whether that's sexism, whether that's like anti-blackness, anti-queer, anti-trans, etc. But like there's no, you know, like you have to come from it from a place of where you identify with working with the other group, with working internally with your own group. So like it could be contradictory, and also I think it like matters on how you view your own identity and like where you see yourself aligned, right? Because you know I've had experiences where like we're working in the Arab community and there's a huge class gap, you know, we're like working even like sometimes like within Palestine solidarity, etc. Like we're working on the same thing, but like there's an issue of class that I have to deal with, right? Or there's an issue of like our experiences, etc. But it's worthy, right, within these spaces, and that's just it's a tactic of organizing, right? It may be what we have to do in the now until we get to a space where we can expand that more, etc.
And can you help me thank our panelists?